I stood by the window, watching my kids chase the last balloons across the yard, their laughter sharp against the soft hum of the evening. It should have been a perfect moment. Birthday decorations, her carefully curated playlist, a cake that smelled like vanilla and sugar, but it wasn't. Not for them. Not for me. I adjusted the silk blouse I had carefully chosen, its soft ivory fabric brushing my arms as I gripped my phone. My heart still thudded in my chest from the text I had just received. "We forgot to mention your children at the party. Sorry, they couldn't be included." My first instinct was to burn up with anger, to storm inside and demand respect, but I stopped myself. I couldn't let her see how deeply this stung. My kids, my precious little humans, had been invisible in front of her circle, and I could almost feel their tiny hearts twisting with confusion and hurt. I ran my fingers over the edge of the balcony railing, noticing the subtle dents in the metal, the way the evening light struck the glass, and let a bitter smile form. I had come a long way to shield myself from this kind of family betrayal, but seeing it land on them, my own children, made the betrayal sharper than I expected. My phone buzzed again. Another message, casual, almost innocent, but it carried the same weight of dismissal. And that's when I realized I wouldn't let this slide. Not now. Not ever. I remember the first time I truly felt invisible in my own family. I was 24, fresh out of college, filled with hope and a little too much naivety. My sister's birthday had been the supposed highlight of the summer. I had spent hours making a scrapbook, filled with memories of our childhood, little notes tucked between the pages, hand-picked gifts that I thought she'd love. I walked into the party, my heart swelling with anticipation. And then nothing. She barely glanced at me. My presence, my effort, my excitement, it was like air. I watched her laughter spill over other guests, her eyes lighting up for everyone but me. My little triumphs and thoughtful gestures were invisible, dismissed as inconsequential. The sting of being ignored was nothing compared to the ache of seeing my own kids one day facing the same disregard. I had felt it then, but I didn't know it would echo so strongly years later. I remember sitting alone on the porch, clutching the scrapbook to my chest, feeling my hands tremble and a lump rise in my throat. Tears burned behind my eyes, and I whispered to myself, I won't let anyone make me feel this small ever again. That night, my grandmother, the only one who seemed to notice my pain, handed me a small silver locket. "Carry this," she said softly. "It's a reminder that your worth is never measured by how others treat you, but by the love you give and the strength you find in yourself." That locket became my talisman. I started making small decisions to reclaim my life, little acts of courage, taking extra classes to grow my skills, saying no to those who drained me, setting boundaries even when it hurt. By the time I closed that chapter of my youth, I had taken the first real steps toward independence. I learned that strength wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. And I promised myself that one day, if the world or my family tried to overlook me or, worse, my children, I would stand in a place where invisibility was impossible. After that summer, I threw myself into building a life where my worth couldn't be ignored. I moved into a small apartment, the kind where the walls were thin and the paint chipped, but it was mine. Every day was a struggle, long hours at a job that barely paid the bills, nights studying new skills, learning the ropes of entrepreneurship from scratch. I felt exhausted most of the time, but for the first time, I felt alive. I met people along the way who saw what my family never did. A mentor, Mrs. Carmichael, an elegant woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a warm smile, believed in me when I doubted myself. "Your value isn't in their recognition," she told me once. "It's in the legacy you're building, quietly but surely." I clung to those words as I navigated every obstacle. There were moments of despair. I cried silently at my desk when the bills stacked up faster than the revenue. I questioned if I was doing enough, if I had made the right choices, if maybe I was chasing a dream that wasn't meant to be mine. But I always returned to the locket from my grandmother, clasped around my neck, a reminder of my promise. Small victories started to pile up. My first major client, a business deal I had nearly lost to doubt, came through. I celebrated quietly, taking my kids to the park afterward and feeling a satisfaction deeper than applause. I watched their faces light up when I told them we could finally buy the piano they'd been begging for. Those moments, the quiet joy of nurturing them while building something lasting, fueled me more than any recognition ever could. I learned to balance being a mother and a dreamer. My children became my motivation, my reason to push harder, to keep refining my craft. I celebrated their first steps, first words, first small triumphs, while I quietly celebrated my own. My family saw only what I allowed them to see. The occasional social media post, polite but vague updates, nothing that revealed the real depth of my success. I became a master of quiet power, the kind that doesn't boast or demand validation. I learned that real achievement doesn't need applause. It needs patience, persistence, and the courage to rise even when everyone else expects you to stumble. Every decision I made, every late night and early morning, was for this: a future where my children would never feel invisible again, and where I could face the people who doubted me without trembling. And I kept the promise I had made on that porch years ago, to create a life where invisibility was impossible, and to hold that space not just for myself, but for my children. The day they arrived, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm. My children were in the backyard, laughing and chasing bubbles under the late afternoon sun, unaware that the storm of family expectation was about to collide with the reality I had built. I opened the door with a polite smile, letting them in as they stepped into my home. They expected a modest, struggling life. Maybe a cramped apartment, a tired mother juggling work and responsibilities, but not this. Not the space I had curated with deliberate care. The living room flooded with natural light, walls adorned with elegant artwork I had invested in myself, shelves lined with books I had read and written notes in for inspiration. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint aroma of coffee, a subtle but deliberate signal that this was a home where order, care, and accomplishment thrived. My sister's eyes widened, her perfect party planning instincts momentarily lost. She scanned the space, her lips pressing together in surprise, but no words came immediately. My mother, always the one with a critical eyebrow raised, simply paused mid-step, her hands gripping her purse strap a little too tightly. I gestured toward the living room, letting the silence hang for just a heartbeat longer. I wanted them to absorb it fully, to feel the weight of every success I had quietly built while they assumed I was struggling. Then I spoke calm but firm. I know you probably expected something different when you walked in today. That I'd still be struggling, that my children would be waiting quietly while you take the spotlight. But that's not our reality anymore. Their eyes followed me as I moved through the room, subtly showcasing the details that mattered. The carefully framed certificates of my achievements, the small awards that marked milestones I had never announced to anyone, the photos of my children smiling in moments I had protected from judgment. I've built this life, I continued, quietly, intentionally for my kids and for me. Every client I earned, every deal I closed, every late night, it was for us. And we thrive because we never depended on approval that never came. My sister's hand shook slightly as she reached for words that didn't exist. My mother's lips parted, then closed again, her usual defenses crumbling as she realized the depth of her oversight. The room was heavy with disbelief, shame, and, reluctantly, admiration. I paused, letting it all settle. Your neglect at past birthdays, the moments you overlooked my children, the way you dismissed me. I remember. But we're not defined by those moments anymore. We're defined by the life we've created and by the respect we demand now. I watched them absorb the weight of my words. My children, blissfully unaware of the tension, ran past us, their laughter a sharp contrast to the stunned silence in the room. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a power that didn't need to shout. The truth had been revealed. Invisibility was no longer an option. For the first time in years, I saw recognition, not just the empty kind, but the reluctant, awed kind. And I knew that this moment, this confrontation, would change the course of our interactions forever. They were seeing me, not the version they assumed, not the one they had dismissed, but the woman who had fought, risen, and protected her family above all else. After the initial shock faded, I realized the real work was just beginning. Recognition was not enough. My children deserved not only acknowledgment, but a promise that past patterns wouldn't repeat. And I wasn't going to let anyone step into our lives unless they were willing to meet the standards we had built for ourselves. I took a deep breath, letting my calm assertiveness set the tone. "I want to help you understand what this means," I said, my eyes steady on my sister first. "Not just for me, but for my children. If you want a place in their lives, it won't be on your terms." She swallowed hard, and I could see her discomfort, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes that charm and familiarity aren't enough. "First," I continued, "you need to acknowledge the ways you've dismissed us, especially during important moments. Apologies aren't just words, they're promises of change." My mother's gaze dropped to the floor, her usual critiques silenced by a rare vulnerability. "Second," I said, turning to her, "you must respect the boundaries we've set. That means celebrating my children as individuals, not through comparison, judgment, or favoritism." I walked past them, letting each word sink in. "Third, everyone here must commit to genuine growth. No more repeating toxic habits, no more dismissing voices that matter. This house, these lives, are not a stage for your insecurities or old grudges. We thrive on respect, love, and intentional action." I paused, giving them time to absorb the weight of my conditions. Then I softened my tone, though not my resolve. "I care about you," I said. "I want these relationships to grow. But care alone isn't enough anymore. You need to match it with accountability and effort. My children's hearts are not negotiable, and neither is the respect I've earned through years of struggle." Their reactions were telling. My sister's hands fidgeted, but I saw a flicker of understanding. My mother's shoulders relaxed slightly, the rigidity giving way to reflection. The initial shame in their eyes began to shift towards something I could work with. Willingness. Not complete, not perfect, but present. And that was enough. Not because I needed them to change, but because I needed them to know that I had the power to enforce boundaries, to demand respect, and to protect the space my children and I had fought so hard to create. I ended the conversation by gesturing toward the kids playing outside, unburdened and joyful. They deserve adults who lift them up, not tear them down. If you want to be part of their lives, the rules are simple: honesty, respect, and action. For the first time, I felt the shift fully settle in. The power dynamic had reversed. I wasn't just the woman who had been overlooked. I was the one holding the space, setting the terms, and defining the boundaries. And I did it without anger, without revenge, only with the quiet force of someone who had endured, risen, and refused to be invisible again. Weeks passed, and I watched subtle changes unfold. My sister began reaching out, small gestures of inclusion for my kids, a note tucked into a backpack, a thoughtful message on a weekend, a genuine attempt to listen without judgment. My mother, too, started checking in ways that didn't carry the weight of critique or expectation. Their efforts were tentative, but they were real, and that mattered. I reflected on how far we had come. The pain of past betrayals still lingered, a faint echo of the woman I used to be, but it no longer dictated our present. My children's laughter was the loudest validation of everything I had worked for, a home filled with love, resilience, and respect. I had learned that the power to protect, nurture, and define my family didn't come from anyone else. It came from within me. I held the silver locket my grandmother had given me years ago. It glinted in the soft sunlight, a reminder of the promise I had made to myself that night on the porch. "Your worth is never measured by how others treat you," her words echoed in my mind. Now, they weren't just words. They were a lived truth. I watched my children run through the yard, free, joyful, and visible in ways I had always dreamed for them. I smiled, letting the warmth of pride and relief fill me. I realized that the betrayal, the hurt, and the disregard I had faced were all part of the journey that brought me here, to a place of quiet strength and undeniable accomplishment. And though the scars of being overlooked would always remain, they no longer held power over me. I had learned to balance compassion with firmness, love with boundaries, and hope with realism. My family could choose to rise with us or remain in the shadows of their own making. The choice was theirs, but the space for our joy, our dignity, and our visibility was protected, unshakable. I breathed in the evening air, letting it fill me with calm certainty. I knew the future, our future, was bright, unburdened by past betrayals. And as I watched my children laughing, my heart full and unafraid, I whispered to myself the truth I had carried all these years. We're seen, we're strong, and nothing can ever take that away. Narrator: Emily Carter. Bottom of form.